The evening was warm, and the sky held a soft, golden glow as the sun started to dip behind the city skyline. The mansion sat on a hill, its lights beginning to glow like a beacon in the twilight. Inside, preparations for the grand party were in full swing. Servants scurried through the corridors, arranging flowers, polishing glasses, and making sure every detail was perfect. The air smelled of fresh roses and the faint hint of expensive perfume. This was not just any party. This was a gathering of people who believed that wealth and influence could command attention. And tonight, the wealthy would showcase themselves in every way possible. Among the staff was a young waitress. She was quiet, humble, and had a gentle way about her that made her easy to overlook. She moved through the mansion with a sense of purpose, carrying trays filled with glasses of champagne and delicate canapes, making sure she didn't bump into anyone or drop anything. Most of the guests barely noticed her, as she blended into the background, invisible among the glittering crowd. But she had a secret, one that only a few people knew. She could play the piano. Not just play it, but play it beautifully, with a touch that could make even the most distracted listener stop and listen. Music was her escape, her safe place, and the thing that made her feel truly alive. The millionaire, the host of the party, was walking through the grand hall with a glass of wine in hand. He had a commanding presence, and there was a certain arrogance in the way he carried himself. He liked to be in control, to be admired, and to have others revolve around him like planets around the sun. He noticed the young waitress moving gracefully through the crowd, her quiet demeanor standing out in a way he found intriguing. Curiosity sparked in him, mixed with a desire to assert his power. He had a reputation for showing off at parties, and he liked to surprise his guests with unexpected events. But there was also a streak of cruelty in him, a need to remind people of their place. As he watched her, he remembered hearing from another staff member that she could play the piano. The idea took root in his mind. He smiled, not with warmth, but with a calculating sense of amusement. This could be entertaining. The guests would enjoy it, and more importantly, she would be exposed. She would be forced to perform in front of people who had no reason to care about her, and he would be at the center of it all, orchestrating the spectacle. The thought made him chuckle quietly to himself. Meanwhile, the waitress was unaware of the attention she had drawn. She focused on her work, making sure each tray was balanced, each guest greeted politely. Her mind wandered to the piano at the small music room in the back of the mansion, where she often played when no one was around. She remembered the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, the way the notes seemed to pour out of her effortlessly when she allowed herself to forget the world. That was where she felt safe, where she felt free. The party, with all its glitter and chatter, was far from that world. The millionaire approached one of the other guests, a well-dressed socialite, and whispered something in her ear. She laughed, a little too loudly, and nodded. He turned his attention back to the waitress, already planning how he would make this moment unfold. He walked over to the small crowd of guests who had gathered near the piano in the corner of the room, and he called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special surprise tonight." His voice carried, confident and commanding. The chatter in the room quieted, and eyes turned toward him. He continued, a sly smile on his face. "Our lovely waitress here has a talent that some of you may not know about. She will be performing on the piano tonight." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some guests looked at each other with mild curiosity, others with polite interest. The waitress froze for a moment, a tray slipping slightly in her hands. Her heart raced. She had never been asked to perform in front of a crowd like this, and certainly not under these circumstances. She felt a wave of panic, the room suddenly feeling much larger and more intimidating. She set the tray down carefully, her hands trembling slightly, and tried to steady her breath. She wanted to say something, to refuse, but the millionaire's eyes were on her, and she knew it was impossible to ignore his command. She glanced around at the guests, some smiling politely, others watching with curiosity, and a few with subtle amusement. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her. She wanted to disappear, to find a corner where she could hide, but she also felt a flicker of determination. Music had always been her refuge, and perhaps now it could be her shield. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of nerves inside her. As the millionaire clapped his hands and gestured toward the piano, the guests formed a loose circle, giving her space to move. She walked toward the instrument slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The polished keys gleamed under the soft lighting, reflecting a sense of grandeur that both intimidated and inspired her. She sat down on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys, remembering the countless hours she had spent practicing in secret. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Every eye was on her, waiting for the performance that the millionaire had promised. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the memories of music fill her mind. She remembered the first time she touched a piano, how the notes had seemed to speak to her in a language that was entirely her own. She thought of the times she had played for herself, the way the music had soothed her fears and lifted her spirits. That memory gave her a small measure of courage. Perhaps she could do this, even with the eyes of the wealthy and powerful upon her. The millionaire leaned back slightly, expecting the beginning of a spectacle. He anticipated awkwardness, hesitancy, perhaps even embarrassment. He sipped his wine, confident in the unfolding drama. But the waitress, though nervous, had a different plan. She would not let fear dictate her actions. She would play, and she would play well. The notes would flow from her as naturally as breathing, and in that moment, she would reclaim her dignity. She opened her eyes and let her fingers touch the keys. The first note was tentative, soft, almost fragile, but it held a certain honesty that could not be ignored. A second note followed, then a third, gradually building in confidence. The sound filled the room, subtle at first, then more assured, capturing the attention of the guests. Some leaned in slightly, intrigued by the unexpected talent of the young woman they had barely noticed before. The millionaire raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He had expected hesitation and discomfort, but instead, he was met with skill and emotion. The waitress continued, her nervousness slowly transforming into focus. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, finding the rhythm and flow of the music. The melody was simple, yet it carried a depth that touched those listening. The room, once filled with casual chatter and clinking glasses, now held only the sound of the piano and the quiet, attentive breathing of the guests. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted, and the young woman who had seemed so small and invisible began to command the room. Even as she played, she was aware of the millionaire's gaze. He was watching, calculating, trying to regain the control he had intended to assert. But her music was stronger than his intentions. Each note spoke of her resilience, her patience, and her hidden strength. The audience felt it too. Whispers of admiration began to ripple through the crowd, polite smiles replaced with genuine appreciation. The young waitress, once the object of a cruel spectacle, was now the center of genuine attention and respect. As the final notes lingered in the air, she allowed herself a brief moment to exhale, the tension leaving her shoulders. The room remained quiet for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause. The guests clapped sincerely, some standing, others smiling broadly. The young waitress looked up, her heart still racing, and saw the mixture of surprise and discomfort on the millionaire's face. He had underestimated her, and the result was undeniable. She had turned what was meant to humiliate her into a moment of triumph, and in doing so, she had claimed her own power. The evening continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. The millionaire's aura of control was diminished, replaced by the lingering impression of her talent and courage. Guests approached her, offering compliments and expressing genuine admiration. The young waitress, still trembling slightly, realized that this night had changed everything. She had faced her fear, played with honesty, and had been seen for who she truly was. The experience left her with a sense of accomplishment and a newfound confidence she had never known before. And so, the party went on, filled with laughter, conversation, and music, but the memory of her performance remained in the minds of everyone present. She had stepped out of the shadows and onto the stage, not just as a waitress, but as someone who could no longer be overlooked. The evening had begun with the intent to humiliate, but it ended with her shining in a way that could not be denied. A reminder that courage and talent could transform even the most intimidating situations into moments of triumph. After the applause faded, the young waitress returned to her duties, but she felt different. Each step she took through the mansion carried a newfound confidence. The previous tension, which had almost made her stumble, had transformed into a quiet strength. She realized that the night was far from over, and that there would be many more moments where she would have to navigate the crowd. But she felt ready in a way she hadn't before. The millionaire, still standing near the piano, was quietly fuming. His plan to humiliate her had backfired in front of the very guests he wanted to impress. He had expected awkward glances, nervous mistakes, or hesitation, but instead, she had played with grace and precision. He had always believed that wealth could control every situation, but tonight, he had learned that talent and courage were forces that could not be ignored. He sipped his drink slowly, masking his frustration, and watched as people whispered and smiled at the young waitress, some even praising her quietly to one another. The young woman moved through the crowd, refilling drinks and serving food, but she noticed subtle changes in the way people looked at her. The polite nods she had once received had been replaced with genuine interest, soft smiles, and in some cases, admiration. She felt a warmth in her chest, a recognition that she had not expected. Music had always been her private world, but now it had reached beyond the small, quiet corners of her life and touched others in a way she had never imagined. She was learning, in real time, the impact of stepping forward and embracing her abilities. Meanwhile, the millionaire started to speak quietly to a few close friends, trying to regain the control of the evening. He attempted to shift attention back to himself by directing conversations, pointing out expensive wines and rare artworks, and engaging guests with stories of business triumphs. Yet, each time he did, he noticed that the energy in the room subtly shifted back to the young waitress. Even those who were deeply ingrained in the elite social scene found themselves discussing her performance, the delicate touch on the keys, the emotional expression she had conveyed in just a few minutes. The waitress, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement, took a small break near the music room. She leaned against the wall and allowed herself a few quiet moments. Her hands still tingled from the performance. Her heart still raced, but there was no panic now. She replayed the piece in her mind, noticing the way each note had connected with the audience. She realized that fear could be a powerful motivator, but confidence, even in small amounts, could carry someone far beyond the expectations of others. Her eyes softened, and a small smile appeared as she acknowledged her own strength. Across the room, a few guests who were intrigued by her talent began to approach her with curiosity. One asked about her musical background, genuinely interested in her journey. She explained, simply and honestly, that she had always loved music, that playing the piano had been her escape and her joy. Another guest complimented her on the courage it took to perform under such pressure. Each conversation, each compliment, added layers of encouragement and recognition she had never received before. For the first time, she began to imagine possibilities beyond the walls of the mansion and the life of waiting tables. The millionaire noticed the small gatherings of guests around her and felt a prick of unease. He realized that the attention he had hoped to control had slipped from his grasp. He had underestimated not only her skill but also her ability to command respect through quiet confidence. His mind began to calculate how to regain dominance, but he also began to understand, in an uncomfortable way, that not all situations could be manipulated with money and authority. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but it marked the beginning of a change in the way he viewed the young woman. The evening continued, with laughter and conversation filling the rooms. The young waitress continued her work, yet she moved with a different energy now. She was no longer simply serving food and drinks. She was a presence, a person whose talent had created a ripple effect. Each tray she carried seemed lighter, each interaction smoother, because she had tasted the power of her own abilities. She noticed how people leaned in when she spoke, how their expressions softened, and how their voices carried a tone of genuine respect. Back near the piano, the millionaire tried one last subtle maneuver to draw attention back to himself. He suggested a toast to his own business successes, raising his glass in the air. The guests clinked glasses politely, but the excitement was fleeting. Their thoughts wandered back to the young woman, to the courage it had taken her to perform, and to the beauty of the music she had shared. Even as he spoke, he realized that the control he had wielded over the evening was no longer absolute. Influence, he understood in that moment, could not replace authenticity and talent. The waitress caught glimpses of the admiration around her and felt a mix of humility and pride. She thought of the countless hours she had spent in quiet practice, of the moments when music had been her only companion, her only solace. Tonight, those private hours had transformed into something tangible, something that could be seen, felt, and appreciated by others. She felt a growing sense of purpose, a realization that her life could be shaped not just by circumstance but by the courage to share her gifts. As the night deepened, she found a few quiet moments to herself in the music room. She sat at the piano once again, letting her fingers wander over the keys. The melody was softer this time, reflective rather than performed for an audience. It was a private affirmation, a reminder of why she played in the first place. Music was not just a way to impress others or to meet expectations. It was a part of who she was. The sound filled the room, resonating in her chest, and she felt a sense of completeness she had rarely experienced in the day-to-day routine of work. The millionaire observed this quiet moment from a distance, a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect in his expression. He had intended to orchestrate an evening that demonstrated power and control, but what he had witnessed was a display of strength that he could not command or diminish. It was humbling in a way he was not accustomed to, and it left him with an uneasy awareness that the young woman had achieved something he had not anticipated. She had turned a moment meant to humiliate into a quiet, undeniable triumph. Guests continued to circulate, some engaging in conversation with her, some simply watching with curiosity and admiration. The atmosphere in the mansion had shifted subtly but unmistakably. The evening was no longer solely about wealth, status, or influence. It had become about talent, courage, and the ability to rise above intimidation. The young waitress, once overlooked and underestimated, had become a central figure in the evening's story. Her presence was no longer just functional. It was transformative. As the party began to wind down, the young woman reflected on the events of the night. She realized that while the millionaire had sought to control her through embarrassment, he had inadvertently created an opportunity for her to shine. The experience had strengthened her confidence, shown her the power of courage, and revealed the genuine respect that could come from sharing her true self. She understood that this night would stay with her, not because of the grandeur of the mansion or the wealth of the guests, but because of the personal victory she had claimed. The millionaire, observing the conversations and interactions around her, could not ignore the truth. He had underestimated her, and she had emerged stronger. The evening had started with a plan to humiliate, but it had ended with recognition and admiration. The dynamics of control and influence had shifted, subtly yet unmistakably. He was left to ponder a lesson he rarely had to confront: that not all power could be wielded through wealth or authority, and that talent combined with courage could transcend expectations. As the last guests departed and the mansion grew quiet, the young waitress found herself alone in the music room once more. She sat at the piano, letting her fingers dance over the keys, not for anyone else, but for herself. The melodies were gentle, reflective, and full of gratitude. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and emerged stronger. The night had tested her, but it had also revealed the depth of her resilience and the beauty of her gift. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she had learned that courage, talent, and authenticity could carry her through even the most intimidating moments. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, but the atmosphere still hummed with anticipation. Guests moved slowly through the grand hall, sipping wine and chatting politely, but their eyes kept drifting toward the piano, where the young waitress had earlier shown her unexpected talent. The memory of her performance lingered, creating a subtle tension between admiration and curiosity. Even the millionaire could not ignore it. though he tried to mask his discomfort behind casual conversation and small gestures of control. A soft announcement from one of the staff members indicated that the piano would be available again for a second performance. Some of the guests looked intrigued, their whispers carrying a mix of excitement and expectation. The young waitress felt a sudden rush of nerves as the implication sank in. The attention was turning back to her, and this time it felt even more pressing. She wondered if she should decline, if she should hide, but deep down, a small voice urged her to play again. The first performance had been a triumph, and she realized that this was another opportunity to show her strength and her gift. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and moved toward the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat down, but she felt a sense of purpose guiding her movements. The guests watched quietly, the room holding its collective breath. The millionaire, observing from a distance, could feel the change in the energy of the evening. He had hoped to create embarrassment, but now the focus was on her skill and composure. There was no hesitation, no faltering, only the calm determination of someone who had found her moment. As her fingers touched the keys, the first notes were delicate, almost hesitant, yet they carried an unmistakable clarity. The melody flowed naturally, each chord connecting with the listener, drawing them in without demanding attention. The room, filled with the soft murmur of conversation, gradually quieted as the music filled the space. Guests turned, leaning in to listen more closely, their curiosity giving way to genuine appreciation. The young waitress felt a shift in herself as well. Her fear transformed into focus, her nervousness melting into a quiet strength that allowed her to play with freedom. The millionaire watched closely, his initial amusement replaced by a flicker of surprise. He had not anticipated that her second performance would carry such emotion, that she would command the room not with words, but with the honesty of her music. He tried to maintain his composure, taking small sips from his glass, but the admiration of the guests was unmistakable. Each note she played seemed to echo through the room, drawing attention to her talent and inadvertently diminishing his authority. He had intended to control the narrative, to create a moment of humiliation, but she had rewritten it entirely. Guests whispered to one another, sharing impressions of her skill. One remarked quietly on how she seemed so composed despite the pressure, while another commented on the depth of feeling in her music. The young waitress, aware of the whispers, felt a strange mix of vulnerability and pride. She realized that the audience was not there to judge her harshly, but to experience something authentic and beautiful. The realization allowed her to play more freely, letting the melody expand and flow without restraint. The music began to rise in intensity, each chord more confident than the last. She remembered her countless hours of practice, the long nights spent perfecting scales and compositions, the private moments where music had been her companion and her solace. That memory gave her courage, a reminder that her talent was hers alone, and that it had value beyond the intentions of others. She could feel the connection forming between herself and the listeners, a silent understanding that transcended words. The millionaire, attempting to regain control, made subtle gestures to redirect attention, pointing out rare decorations and initiating discussions on art pieces. Yet each attempt was met with polite acknowledgement but no real engagement. The guest's attention kept returning to the young woman and the music she created. He realized, with a mix of frustration and reluctant admiration, that the performance had shifted the power dynamic in the room. She was no longer a background figure. She had become the centerpiece, the person everyone quietly admired. The young waitress felt the growing confidence in her own abilities. Each note played with a balance of skill and emotion. She noticed the expressions on the faces of the guests. Some were smiling in quiet delight, others had their eyes closed, savoring the music. A few leaned forward, as if trying to capture every detail, every subtle nuance. In that moment, she realized that she had created a space where the audience could feel something real, something heartfelt, and that her role was not just to play, but to share a piece of herself. The room held its collective attention, and the melody shifted, becoming more expressive, more daring. The young waitress allowed herself to explore dynamics she had only ever practiced in solitude. The notes danced lightly at times and flowed deeply at others, creating an emotional arc that resonated with everyone present. The power of the music was undeniable, and it carried her beyond the fear she had felt when first stepping into the spotlight. The millionaire's posture grew tense, though he did his best to hide it. He had expected a performance that would highlight her nervousness, but instead, she was revealing her competence and artistry. Guests whispered to each other about the unexpected talent of someone they had barely noticed, and the young waitress realized that the impact of her music went far beyond the piano itself. It was changing perceptions, breaking assumptions, and creating a moment of authentic connection in a room accustomed to pretense. The melody reached a gentle climax, not loud or dramatic, but profound in its simplicity. Each note seemed intentional, every pause measured to create a lingering sense of anticipation. She could feel the eyes on her, the quiet admiration, and a few respectful nods. It was not just applause she sought, but acknowledgement of the dedication and passion behind each chord. And as she played the final notes, the room erupted in a wave of appreciation. The applause was immediate, genuine, and sustained, with some guests rising to their feet in recognition of her skill. The young waitress exhaled, letting her fingers rest on the final key. Her heart still raced, but it was a mixture of relief, pride, and excitement. She had done it. She had taken what could have been a moment of embarrassment and turned it into something powerful, something that others admired. The confidence she had gained was palpable, a quiet flame that burned brighter with each acknowledgement from the guests. The millionaire, standing near the piano, felt the sting of the unexpected. He had attempted to orchestrate a scene that would demonstrate his control and authority, but instead, he had witnessed a display of authenticity, courage, and skill that he could neither diminish nor dismiss. He realized that influence and wealth could set the stage, but they could not dictate talent or character. The young waitress had shown him, in the simplest of ways, the power of embracing one's own abilities. Guests continued to express their admiration, with several approaching her to offer compliments and ask about her musical background. Each interaction added to the sense of recognition and validation she felt. The young waitress, despite the lingering nervousness, found herself smiling genuinely, appreciating the connections she was making. It was a moment that transcended social hierarchy, a reminder that authenticity and skill could earn respect in a room otherwise dominated by status and wealth. The evening pressed on, but the piano and the young woman's performance became the memory that defined the night. The energy in the room had shifted. The atmosphere no longer centered solely on opulence and social display. Instead, it had become about admiration, talent, and courage. And while the millionaire still attempted to maintain control over other aspects of the party, he knew, deep down, that the young waitress had claimed the true attention of the guests. Her presence, her talent, and her poise had rewritten the narrative. As the music faded and the guests resumed their conversations, the young waitress felt a sense of inner triumph. She had faced a challenging moment and transformed it into a declaration of her ability and character. The applause, the whispers of admiration, and the respectful nods from the audience were tangible signs of her impact. And in that realization, she understood that her journey was just beginning, that moments like these could define her path and open doors she had never imagined. The millionaire, reflecting on the events, recognized that the evening had taught him a lesson in humility. He had underestimated the quiet strength of someone he had deemed insignificant, and in doing so, he had witnessed a display of courage and talent that outshone any display of wealth. It was a subtle but profound reminder that power is not always derived from status, but from the courage to rise above expectations and the ability to share one's gifts authentically. The applause from her second performance still echoed softly through the grand hall, creating a hum of admiration and surprise that lingered in the air. Guests exchanged quiet words of praise, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the hidden talent they had almost overlooked. The young waitress, still seated at the piano, felt a wave of relief and satisfaction, but also a surge of something deeper, a sense of empowerment she had never known before. She had turned what was meant to be a moment of embarrassment into a showcase of her courage and skill, and the result was undeniable. She rose slowly from the piano bench, her hands lingering briefly on the keys as if to savor the final notes. Her fingers tingled with the memory of the music, and a small, proud smile spread across her face. She took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The weight she had carried for so long, the anxiety, the fear of judgment, was lifting. She had faced a room full of people who had expected her to falter, and instead, she had shone. The millionaire, observing from across the room, felt a sting of frustration he could not hide. He had anticipated a moment of awkwardness, a subtle faltering that would amuse his guests, but what he had witnessed was nothing short of mastery. The young woman's talent and composure had turned the intended spectacle against him. Guests were now speaking about her with admiration, not in hushed whispers but with genuine respect. Even those who were accustomed to the games of wealth and influence recognized the rare brilliance of someone who had so calmly claimed the spotlight. As she walked back into the flow of the party, resuming her duties, the atmosphere seemed to have shifted in her favor. Guests approached her more openly now, some asking about her musical background, others simply complimenting her courage and poise. Each interaction reinforced a growing confidence within her. She began to realize that her talent, combined with her willingness to confront fear, could create moments that left lasting impressions. The world of the mansion, once intimidating and overwhelming, felt slightly more navigable, slightly more welcoming. A few guests lingered near the piano, hesitant to leave the space where her music had transformed the atmosphere. One older guest, with eyes that carried both curiosity and wisdom, approached her. "You have a remarkable gift," they said quietly. "It is rare to see someone who can command attention with both skill and humility." The young waitress felt a flush of pride, but she responded with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I just play what I feel." The simplicity of her answer, honest and unassuming, seemed to resonate more than any boast or explanation could have. The millionaire attempted to reclaim some measure of control, gathering his closest friends to discuss business matters and the successes of the evening. He spoke with authority, trying to redirect attention, but the energy had already shifted. His words were met with polite acknowledgement, yet they lacked the spark they had carried earlier. The young waitress had become the unexpected center of attention, and her presence lingered in conversations long after she had walked away from the piano. As the night wore on, she found a few quiet moments to reflect in a small side room, away from the chatter and glittering lights. She sat on a chair, her hands resting in her lap, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The hours she had spent practicing in secret, the moments of doubt, and the countless times she had questioned her own abilities. All of it had led to this moment of quiet triumph. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear but the choice to act despite it. That realization filled her with a deep sense of self-respect. Meanwhile, the millionaire's demeanor had changed subtly. Though he maintained a facade of composure, a few guests had begun to comment on the young waitress's performance, and he could feel the shift in perception. The intended humiliation had backfired, and in its place was a quiet admiration for someone he had assumed would be intimidated. He observed the way guests spoke to her, noting the genuine smiles, the respectful nods, and the casual conversations that carried admiration without expectation. It was a subtle but undeniable lesson in humility. The young waitress, sensing that the night's momentum was in her favor, returned to the piano once more, not to perform formally, but to play softly for herself and anyone nearby who wished to listen. Her fingers danced lightly across the keys, creating a melody that was intimate and reflective. A few guests lingered, quietly listening, their expressions softening as they absorbed the gentle music. The atmosphere of the party shifted again, from formal celebration to something more personal and heartfelt. The sound of her playing seemed to touch the room in a way that wealth and power could not. Guests began to approach her with genuine interest, asking about the pieces she had played and her experiences with music. Each conversation added layers of validation and recognition. The young waitress found herself sharing her story, speaking about how music had been her refuge, her way of expressing emotions that words could not capture. The simplicity and honesty of her words resonated with those listening. It was a reminder that talent paired with authenticity could leave a lasting impression far beyond the superficialities of wealth and status. The millionaire, watching the interactions unfold, felt an unfamiliar pang of discomfort. He had intended to manipulate the evening, to create a spectacle that highlighted his control, but he had witnessed a different kind of power, one rooted in talent, authenticity, and courage. He realized that influence and wealth could set the stage, but they could not manufacture respect or admiration. The young waitress had earned both quietly and effectively, and there was nothing he could do to change that. As the evening approached its final hours, the young waitress continued to move among the guests, her presence now marked by confidence rather than nervousness. She had become a symbol of grace under pressure, a reminder that true strength often lies in embracing one's abilities and standing firm in the face of challenge. The subtle nods of approval, the smiles of genuine interest, and the quiet admiration she received reinforced a sense of self-worth that was deeply empowering. At one point, a group of guests gathered near the piano, encouraging her to play one more piece. This time, she agreed willingly, not out of obligation but from a desire to share her music. As her fingers traced the keys, the melody filled the room once more, soft at first and then growing in confidence and richness. The guests listened intently, captivated not only by the music, but by the evident joy and dedication behind it. Each note told a story of perseverance, courage, and quiet triumph. The millionaire observed silently, realizing that his initial plan had entirely missed the mark. The young waitress had transformed the situation, asserting herself not through confrontation or defiance, but through talent and composure. She had turned humiliation into admiration, intimidation into respect, and in doing so, she had quietly altered the social dynamics of the evening. The guests' reactions spoke volumes, their conversations lingering on her abilities and poise long after the final note faded. As the night drew to a close, the young waitress felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had faced a situation designed to unsettle her and emerged with dignity, strength, and recognition. The applause, the smiles, the quiet conversations, all of it contributed to a growing confidence that she had never felt before. She realized that moments of challenge could reveal hidden reserves of courage and resilience, and that sharing her true self could create lasting connections and opportunities. The millionaire, reflecting on the night, understood that he had underestimated her. His intent to showcase control had been thwarted by her talent, her courage, and her authenticity. It was a subtle yet significant lesson in humility, a reminder that influence alone could not dictate outcomes. The young waitress had earned the admiration of the guests, not through manipulation or status, but through skill, integrity, and composure. As the last guests departed and the mansion quieted, she found herself alone once again in the music room. Sitting at the piano, she allowed her fingers to wander over the keys in a gentle, reflective melody. The notes carried a sense of peace, gratitude, and quiet triumph. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and transformed an intimidating moment into a personal victory. The music, soft and intimate, filled the room, a testament to the courage and strength she had discovered within herself. The night had begun with the intent to humiliate, but it had ended with recognition, respect, and the quiet knowledge that she had claimed her moment of true triumph. The mansion was quiet now, the last guests having left with memories of the evening still fresh in their minds. The chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over the empty halls, and the faint scent of flowers lingered in the air. The young waitress moved slowly through the rooms, her steps unhurried, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The evening had begun with the potential for embarrassment and humiliation, but it had ended as a night of personal triumph, of self-discovery, and of recognition she had never expected. Sitting down in the music room, she ran her fingers lightly across the piano keys, letting the notes fill the quiet space. The melody was soft and reflective, almost like a conversation with herself, carrying the emotions of the night, the fear, the determination, the joy, and the pride. She thought about the moments when she had felt small and invisible, and how she had risen above them with courage. The music was a celebration of her resilience. And as she played, she realized that this night would remain a turning point in her life. Throughout the evening, she had noticed the subtle changes in the way people responded to her. Guests who had once barely acknowledged her presence now approached with curiosity and admiration. Their words were simple but sincere, praising her talent, her poise, and her courage. Each compliment reinforced a growing sense of confidence that she had never experienced before. It was a quiet reminder that being authentic, embracing one's skills, and standing firm in the face of challenge could create opportunities far beyond expectation. Even the millionaire had been affected, though he would not admit it aloud. He had intended to control the narrative, to create a spectacle that highlighted his authority, but instead he had witnessed a different kind of power, one that could not be manipulated or purchased. The young waitress had turned the intended humiliation into admiration, and in doing so, she had claimed a place of respect in the eyes of those who had gathered. He observed the shift in the room's energy, the way people lingered on conversations about her, and felt an unfamiliar sense of humility. Influence and wealth had been insufficient to overshadow authenticity and talent. As she continued to play, memories of the evening returned to her mind. The initial fear, the hesitant first notes, the way the room had quieted as she allowed herself to immerse in the music. Each recollection brought a sense of accomplishment, a realization that courage and preparation could transform even the most daunting situations. She remembered the small moments of connection with the guests, the subtle nods, the smiles of genuine appreciation, and the way her music had spoken to them without words. It was a reminder of the impact one could have by sharing one's true self. Later, she wandered through the empty halls, reflecting on how the events had altered her perception of herself. For so long, she had accepted a life of quiet anonymity, believing her abilities were hers alone and perhaps not worthy of attention. But tonight had proven otherwise. She had faced an intimidating situation, confronted fear, and emerged with recognition and respect. The experience had revealed a strength within her that she had never fully acknowledged, a quiet resilience that would guide her in future challenges. The mansion, once a place of potential embarrassment, now felt different to her. Each room held memories of triumph, small victories, and moments where she had proven to herself that she could rise above intimidation. She paused at the entrance to the grand hall, remembering the expressions of surprise and admiration from the guests, the way her music had captivated them, and the subtle shifts in their perception of her. The feeling of empowerment was profound, and she understood that it was not tied to wealth, status, or recognition alone, but to her courage and authenticity. Her thoughts also turned to the piano, the instrument that had been her companion through countless private moments. It had become a tool of transformation tonight, allowing her to communicate what words could not. She realized that talent, when embraced fully and shared honestly, had the power to change perceptions, to connect people, and to create lasting impact. The experience had been both humbling and affirming, and she knew it would shape her future in ways she could not yet fully foresee. The millionaire had left the evening with a different awareness than he had arrived with. He had anticipated a display of control, a spectacle to entertain and amuse, but he had encountered something he could not command or diminish. The young waitress had demonstrated that true power could emerge from talent, authenticity, and courage. He had observed the respect and admiration she had earned, and though it challenged his ego, it was undeniable. The lesson was subtle but profound. Influence and wealth could set the stage, but they could not create genuine respect. The young waitress found herself thinking about the possibilities that lay ahead. She had always loved music, but tonight had opened her eyes to the potential her talent held beyond private moments of practice. Opportunities to perform, to share her music more broadly, or even to pursue new paths had become imaginable. The evening had been a crucible, transforming fear into confidence and uncertainty into clarity. She felt a sense of direction and purpose that had been absent before. As the night drew to its quiet conclusion, she allowed herself a final moment at the piano. The melody she played was soft, reflective, and full of gratitude. It was a song for herself, for the courage she had found, for the resilience she had demonstrated, and for the recognition she had earned. Each note seemed to carry the lessons of the evening, the importance of authenticity, the power of talent, and the strength of facing challenges head-on. It was a private celebration of her journey, a testament to what could be achieved when one embraced both fear and opportunity. Walking through the mansion one last time, she noticed the subtle traces of the party. The lingering scent of flowers, the polished surfaces that reflected the soft light, the empty glasses that had once held champagne. Each detail reminded her of the contrast between the opulence of the setting and the personal triumph she had claimed. The wealth and grandeur of the surroundings had not defined her success. Her courage, skill, and authenticity had. She carried that knowledge with her, a quiet confidence that would guide her steps beyond the night. In the early hours, she stepped outside for a moment, feeling the cool air against her skin. The sky was dark now, the stars scattered like tiny points of light above. She took a deep breath, savoring the stillness and the freedom it represented. The world seemed full of possibilities, each one reachable through courage, talent, and determination. She knew that challenges would continue to arise, that life would not always offer clear opportunities or kind observers. But she also knew that she had the inner strength to navigate them. The night had begun with fear and uncertainty, shaped by the intentions of someone else. Yet it had ended with empowerment, recognition, and a renewed sense of purpose. She had taken control of her narrative, transformed a potentially humiliating situation into a moment of triumph, and discovered the depth of her own resilience. The applause and admiration of the guests were lasting reminders, but the true victory was internal, a recognition of her courage, skill, and ability to rise above expectation. As dawn approached and the mansion lay in quiet repose, the young waitress felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and shared her gift with others in a way that created meaningful impact. The evening had been a turning point, a lesson in courage, authenticity, and self-respect. She knew that the experiences of tonight would stay with her forever, shaping her future choices and the way she approached challenges. Her talent, once private and unrecognized, had now become a symbol of her resilience and strength. Finally, she sat at the piano one last time, letting her fingers wander over the keys in a soft, lingering melody. It was a song of triumph, gratitude, and quiet victory. Each note carried the emotions of the night, the fear she had conquered, the recognition she had earned, and the courage she had discovered. The music echoed in the empty mansion, a testament to the power of authenticity, perseverance, and inner strength. The night had started with the intent to humiliate, but it ended with her rising above, claiming respect and dignity, and realizing that true triumph comes not from the approval of others, but from embracing one's own gifts and facing challenges with courage.